Hello, everyone. Welcome to Queen Mary's Professional Issues Meeting for Bali, happening this June. This is, as you know, a slow pay. We are very fortunate to have with us today Dr. Olwyn Alexander. Those of you who are practitioners in EAP know that what a big name Dr. Olwyn Alexander is. She is not only a distinguished figure in the field of English for academic purposes with a career spanning over 2 decades. She has also significantly contributed to EAP pedagogy, teacher development, and mentoring, which, as you know, are the themes of this professional issues meeting. Most importantly, Olwyn has been the author of the TEAP competencies framework for Bali. So without any further ado, I'm going to start this interview with Dr. Olwyn Alexander. And by the way, I'm Saima Shirazi. I am an EAP practitioner currently at Queen Mary. I'm heading the Language Center. And I have been in EAP for more than 30 years. So, and that's a very, very long time. But 20 years in the UK and before that in Pakistan. So it's been it's been a great learning experience, and my own professional development. I think Bali and Olwyn's work and other people's work, I think, has had a great role to play in my own professional development. And I'm going to start by asking Olwyn, just a basic start question. How has your interest in how did your interest in EAP and literacy development emerge and develop, Olwyn? So going back to the early days of Selmas and probably.
So I came late to English teaching and to English for academic purposes and to Bali. So I wasn't in at the beginning and I didn't have anything to do with Selmas. The first 15 years of my career I spent as an analytical chemist working in a laboratory. And so I got an opportunity, in fact, to leave that job and search around for something else to do. And as it happened, I lighted on academic literacy in the sense of teaching people who had missed out in school how to read and write. So it was called adult basic education in Edinburgh. And I would say that my few years as a volunteer and then as a paid part-time person doing that taught me the fundamental point about EAP as well, and certainly ESL as it was called then, is that it's needs-based. You have to teach the people who are in front of you in the classroom, and you have to find out what they want to do with the language. And for me, that's so important for what we do in EAP. And I sometimes think we forget it. I do think, and I'm basing now my experience on running together with my two colleagues, Sue Argent and Jenifer Spencer, a little EAP teacher development course at Heriot-Watt University, which we ran between about 2002 and 2009. And it was based on the idea that lots of people at that time were running what were called TEFL tasters. What would it be like to teach English? And so we decided to have a sort of EAP taster. And that's what we did. It was a week-long course. So the kinds of people we got on that course were people who already had experience of teaching general English, English for no obvious reason, it's sometimes been called. But there's nothing wrong with that, because it was a big industry in Edinburgh at the time. So the prime centre for this sort of teaching was in Edinburgh University, the Institute for Applied Language Studies. It prided itself on being a research-based enterprise. It taught a lot of Japanese teachers how to teach EFL, General English, and its focus was General English. It didn't really do did a tiny little bit of EAP with a couple of people working in that area, but mainly general English. So what we were getting coming onto our EAP teacher development course were people who had that background, who felt themselves to be competent. And there's a very nice idea coined by Julie King, I think it was, and Steve Kirk, that often these teachers would tell us they felt de-skilled when they were coming into EAP. They felt as if all of the things they thought they knew about how you taught English and how you got people to work together in the class, all of these good communicative practices suddenly were taken away from them, and they felt they didn't know anything. And that for me is the biggest difficulty. And that's the sort of, if you like, that's the classroom puzzle that a teacher coming into EAP has to deal with. I don't think there's any bigger puzzle than that puzzle that they have to ask themselves, what is this new thing I'm trying to do? So when Sue, Jenifer, and I published EAP Essentials, it was a book designed to say to those teachers who felt de-skilled, here's what you need to do. And here's some examples of classroom practice which showed teachers grappling with these ideas. And they weren't, we picked examples which were problems for us. They were real examples we'd experienced. And so we wanted to share those and to say, well, here's how we thought about going about it. But what do you think about this? You know, so the whole emphasis was to try to...
That was a brilliant.
Yep, carry on.
Sorry, yes, that is absolutely an essential book to have in our resource EAP Essentials and the Access books. And so your work in EAP Essential, of EAP Essentials and the Bali TEAP Framework has consistently highlighted the importance of research-informed practice. You've also supported practitioner-led inquiry as a valuable mode of CPD. So my question, which sort of leads us to the theme of this PIM, which is that how can EAP practitioners incorporate research practices into their teaching to enhance both student learning and their own development?
So probably you and possibly your audience are not going to like this idea, but they have to come to understand that at university, the principal thing that people want to do is to do research, to try to add knowledge to the body of knowledge that they're building in any one particular discipline. And so the fundamental skills, if you're going to do research, is you've got to read other people's research and try to understand it and come to think about how it applies to your own practice. And then you've got to write. You've actually got to perhaps try to do some research yourself, building on some of these ideas and trying to write about it. And those are difficult things to do. Those are things which a teacher who has a general English background is not used to doing. They're used to teaching listening and speaking. And I've had teachers say to me, I don't like writing. And I don't really understand how you can teach somebody even to do an IELTS exam if your statement, I don't like writing, is, it's not sort of really possible. So what we set out to do in EAP Essentials was to try to digest the research. And my friend Sue, who's a botanist and a biochemist by training, said we've got to digest little pellets that we can regurgitate for the teachers to take in, just the way a mother bird digests little pellets for their babies and feeds them. So that's what we were trying to do in EAP Essentials, was to take the research. Something we've forgotten about, I think, is the value of a pedagogical description. So if we take something like systemic functional linguistics, it's a research grammar. People try to make it as detailed and delicate as possible so that they can use it to do research. And so in chapter 2 of EAP Essentials, I tried to write a pedagogical description of systemic functional linguistics, which says, forget all the detail, forget all the weird terminology that is used. This is what it looks like if you wanted to try to use it in your classroom with students. So what we want people to do is to approach research through these kind of introduction to research. And there are a lot of introduction to books which can help a teacher to grapple with some of the linguistic and other sort of skills-based research that's done out there, and it's that sort of thing that a teacher needs to engage with, because I think fundamentally, one of my first insights, one of my first puzzles, if you like, was doing some sort of a temporary work with Napier University for some students who were going on to do a master's degree. I think it was, I forget what the subject was now. And it occurred to me that I didn't actually know, because I only had an undergraduate degree, what was involved in doing a master's degree. And I felt I ought to know if I was going to teach these people. So I did then apply to do an applied linguistics degree at Edinburgh. And I feel that you should say to yourself, I must apply to myself the values and practices that apply to these people who are doing this kind of degree in a university. In other words, I must behave in the way that a research student behaves. And I mustn't take refuge in saying, I don't like writing, I don't like reading, I don't understand that, and I'm going to teach what I know how to teach. And so it's a bit of a strong message, but if you're going to be an EAP teacher, you can't be like that. However, if you're going to be an EAP manager, you can't be like that either. And so you have to find a way to create pedagogical descriptions for your staff. And that, to me, is a really important part of CPD, is for the managers have to recognise that this is a challenging thing for staff to do. And by the way, I've met plenty of managers who are just EFL people who've got themselves into the right place at the right time, and they don't understand research. And so the whole culture of a particular organisation hangs around this shying away from actually living the experience of the research students that they're working with, and just saying, well, all we have to do is teach them language. And that's also supported by academic staff who say, no, you don't need to teach them the skills and that sort of thing. You just teach them the language. And that's such a wrong kind of approach, in my view. Right, that was a bit of a rant, wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, really, Olwyn. That's exactly this is what we get from academics. This is what, we have, when you have a manager who doesn't have a research background. And this is exactly what, it's amazing how you have identified that. So, you have set up EAP in the North. And of course, your other contributions to national frameworks, you have sort of helped shape CPD that's kind of practical, collaborative, and grounded in teaching realities. So what do you think are the key elements that should be considered when designing? I mean, you've already pointed out, some that it's you can't shy away from the research culture if you are in EAP. So my question to you is that for managers and for departments, what should be considered when designing CPD programs for EAP teachers to ensure that they remain relevant and also that they're empowered?
Well, I think you've mentioned EAP in the North, which I was involved with, but didn't sort of initiate the setting up of it, but I can't just exactly remember the timeline of that now. Okay. But the important thing about it was, and is and remains, I think, this idea that you get people together to talk to each other and then to listen to other people talk about their experiences around a specific sort of issue which might be doing research. Now, we've got a lot of special interest groups in BALIP that are doing this kind of thing now. And to me, my professional development happened very early on by attending BALIP conferences and professional issues meetings and listening to people talk, listening to how they talked about research, and whether I believed them or not, or whether I could see that they were just a general English teacher. One terrible presentation I went to many years ago was a sort of circular reflection by a teacher who had no understanding that reflection needed input from external sources, such as any reading she might do. And she just went round and round in a little circle, swallowing her own tail and reflecting on her own classroom practice. So that's pretty common. And it's called single loop learning. And we need double loop learning. And we need input from other people talking about what they do. So attending these places where people talked and talked to you was for me a really important thing. So I think, something that's being talked about in the BALIP TEAP portfolio scheme at the moment is the idea of group mentoring. And Carol McDermott at Glasgow University is working on this area. Now, you can do it if you're in a big institution with a secure setup, because even, places that we thought were secure are coming under fire now. But the idea that you might get a group of people together to support each other through a process of aligning their practice with the TEAP competencies and talking to each other about that, because I think that's where some really good insights come from. And then the other thing, of course, is that people have to come to understand that research is an autonomous process and that personal development is autonomous. And I still do quite a bit of mentoring for the TEAP scheme, and I meet a lot of people who expect me to tell them how to get this qualification. And I said to one of them recently, the TEAP scheme is a learning through deep reflection scheme, and all I can do is point you in the right direction. And then you really have to try to think about what things that you might be reading or things you might be hearing mean for your practice. I'm not going to say, write this, write that. I'll read everything and I'll tell you whether you've got there or not. That's the sort of way that you would teach an undergraduate. And we should be operating at postgraduate research-based level.
Yes, yeah. Just to share with you, Olwyn, that when William Tweddle was here, he left last year. He left Queen Mary. So he's now in the north in Newcastle, I think. So he and I, we sort of developed this induction activity for our pre-sessional staff. And this pre-sessional teachers would come to us, and it was based on the TEAP framework. And we had we had 12 questions based on the TEAP framework. And we asked, and it was a 2.5-hour session that we had with the teachers, and we made, divided them into groups. And then and each group discussed 4 questions or 3 questions. And they came back, and it was such an inspiring, that what you're talking about, just talking about EAP issues, with a group of teachers. And the ones we once had somebody who had just come in from EFL, we had hired him because he had the right qualifications, but he had no EAP experience. And the rest of the staff had some EAP experience, and some of them were returning teachers to us. So that person, after that discussion, got so overwhelmed, they decided to withdraw from the pre-session.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah, that was a shame. But the idea was that people got, I think the reason why he did that was because people got so involved in, in discussing what the TEAP framework was and how it is kind of operationalized in the teaching on the pre-sessional course, and how we and in fact our observation form is also kind of based on the TEAP framework. So it was probably it was overwhelmed. That particular aspect of the induction was always very popular, that and we felt that it was into the right kind of concerns, the right elements that they should be developing in their teaching. So, Olwyn, thank you. Let me move on to my yes, my next question is about mentoring, and you have mentioned active in mentoring novice EAP teachers to help them navigate the complexity of EAP teaching.
Yes, so I actually just ran recently a little mentoring session together with Matthew Ketteringham at Leeds online for some teachers who want to mentor on the TEAP scheme. And so one of the things we got them to look at were some resources that we've created to help people to understand some of the key problems that exist when people are trying to put together their portfolios, but also to try to understand a particular group of competencies which people don't do well, and that's the discourse competencies. And so that goes right back to what I said about Chapter 2 in EAP Essentials being a pedagogical approach to functional grammar. And we find that people don't, by and large, understand functional grammar or bring it into their teaching very much. And so I wanted to look at those particular competencies and base the workshop around those. So I think what you've just said about the way that you did your induction, where you tried to unpack the competencies and understand what that meant for practice, that probably is a particularly important thing to do when you're doing CPD. Probably not too overwhelming. We just picked the about 4 or 5 competencies related to discourse, related to understanding discourse, bringing it into planning, and what it looks like in the classroom. And then we presented to the people doing the course a part of a reflective account that somebody had submitted, which had been referred. In other words, they'd been asked to revise it, particularly around this area of their practice. And so we got people to actually do a little role play where somebody was the mentees who'd received this feedback, somebody was the mentor who was giving them advice on what to do next. But crucially, and I think this is something I've used before, and it's a nice little piece of classroom research which gets people thinking about the metacognitive aspects of it. We had a third person who was an observer, and their job was to be quiet, not to join the conversation, but just to take notes. And then in a kind of feedback session at the end, they would say what they heard, what kind of language was used, how, the mentoring situation went. So it allowed the group of 3 then to have a conversation, a metacognitive conversation, which you couldn't really have if you were part of the role play. You just do the roles, but you need somebody observing. So that's a very research-oriented thing to do in a classroom. And you can do it for lots and lots of different things. You get put students together in a group and have an observer who does the research aspect of it, takes notes, writes down what language was used, all of those sorts of things. So, one of your other questions was, well, how can we bring research into the classroom? And that's a very gentle way of doing it, which allows people to understand that the basic sort of aspect of collecting data, if you like. So I don't know if that's answered the question.
I mean, I'm reminded of. No. That is. It resonates with me completely, because this is something that I have tried to introduce on our in-sessional program, which we have rebranded as QM Elevate. Like what I called it was what Julian Edge once called it. He wrote a book on cooperative development. Where he also talks about, a triangle, where you go into a colleague's classroom, and you identify, and then the two people talk about it, and the third person is the observer, and he's taking the notes. And so I'm familiar with that approach, and I've tried introducing it, where you have peer mentoring, or so that Olwyn, thank you so much for taking this time out to talk to us, and we are truly, truly honored. Thank you very much.